This is an interview under caution with Bishop Peter Ball. Neil alleges that you came to his room and you hugged him.
I might have hugged him, yes.
Whilst naked?
Yes. Naked before God.
Neil said that he had a calling for the church. And you think if they're going to the church, there's no other safer place, especially with this supposed to be this great bishop.
Bishop Peter seemed to want me to be more obedient to himself than to God.
Neil Todd was an extremely brave young man. For him to complain about his bishop, his mentor.
Well, please let the Archbishop know that I've started my inquiries.
Letters start coming in from parents of adolescent boys who had been sexually assaulted by Peter Ball.
That was it, and it was just thrown away, it was covered up.
I was concerned that police had identified a potential link between Peter Ball and serious paedophiles, members of the clergy.
These documents, they were discovered in a filing cabinet which was called the Naughty Boys Cabinet.
Peter Ball, I'm arresting you on multiple offences of indecent assault.
It finally seems that these storms are gathering around Peter Ball.
There was a real concern amongst victims and witnesses that there would be some form of establishment cover-up.
I hadn't appreciated the level of deception. And then I thought, you bastard.
Right Reverend Peter Ball has resigned after being formally cautioned by the police over an allegation of gross indecency with a 17-year-old novice monk. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, said the resignation caused him great sorrow.
In 1993, Archbishop George Carey, the head of the Anglican Church, lives at Lambeth Palace. He was the decision maker, he was the boss at Lambeth. Now, there is something known as the Lambeth List, and it's a list of individuals who are barred from having permission to officiate at ceremonies. So it prevents them from being in positions of influence. Now, George Carey knew what had happened, but decided not to put Peter Ball on the Lambeth List. We know that predators, such as Peter Ball, don't change their ways. They don't stop once they are caught. They will continue unless they are challenged and prevented from doing so.
Neil just loved the church. He got great satisfaction of being there and helping other people, and he just loved it. So after everything had come out, Neil was distraught because everybody that was in the church that he looked up to and everything else started calling him a liar. So, yeah. I don't understand how anybody could be friends with him, or I'd feel just so let down, angry. Why are they still supporting this man? It just doesn't make sense to me. But apparently he was quite a friend of Prince Charles.
During the early 90s, before the caution, the two of them were relatively close. Prince Charles attended his enthronement. After the caution, the two of them spent time in private services at Prince Charles's Highgrove house and used his private chapel for those services. Peter Ball and Prince Charles exchanged letters.
I feel so desperately strongly about the monstrous wrongs that have been done to you and the way you have been treated.
The subject of Peter Ball's return to ministry is discussed between Prince Charles and the Archbishop of Canterbury.
I saw the Archbishop the other day and he told me he's trying to bring you back to a public ministry. I do hope this will be all right and suit you if and when it happens.
Prince Charles and Peter Ball were still always in contact and still writing. Well, you think a man of Prince Charles's stature, why would you support somebody like that? If there was somebody in this village that was like that, he'd be shunned. So I don't understand why they can support him.
I pray that the Duchy will be able to find something suitable for you both in due course, but it may take a little time to locate it. I long to see you both settled somewhere that suits you and gives you peace and tranquility. And not too far from here, so you can come over more easily.
We know that Prince Charles has facilitated the provision of a house to Peter Ball.
Your house has been bought successfully. It looks rather nice, and I only hope the rent won't be too bad.
Prince Charles's wedding with Camilla, and then Camilla's father died, and then he done the reading at the funeral. So he's still getting supported in everything that he does.
I can't bear it that the frightful, terrifying man is on the loose again and doing his worst. I was visiting the vicar, and he then told me that he'd heard that this ghastly man was up to his dastardly tricks again. I'll see off this horrid man if he tries anything again.
The letter from Prince Charles to Peter, it's like the language of a gangster. Don't worry, I'll see him off. You know, you're one of the gang, you're one of us. I think the class element is really important. How dare somebody like Neil question their privilege? No matter that terrible things have been committed, it is more terrible for them that they would be criticised, that one of their own would be held accountable. It's mind-boggling how their instinctive reaction was to protect Peter.
The church shunned Neil after he'd made the statements. So that's why after that he decided to go into nursing, because that's another way he could help people. And then decided he was going to move away and make a fresh start, a new life in New Zealand, then Australia.
In 2004, I saw the advertisement for the safeguarding officer for the Diocese of Bath and Wells, and I thought that I might be able to contribute something. So I went for the interview and got the job. It was the first time that somebody had been formally put in that post. There was a lot of hostility and defensiveness at the local level and, as I later discovered, in the hierarchy of the church. The church wanted to be seen to be doing safeguarding, but they didn't really want to know about safeguarding. There was a reluctance to look at anything to do with what one might call the shadow side of the church. And I felt that the work I was doing, it was like the rather grubby little secret that the church was trying to keep at bay. So in 2006, there was a situation with a vicar in the diocese who had been harassing an adolescent boy, and he was given a warning by the police. It became clear that there needed to be a written agreement in place so that he wouldn't have further contact with this young man nor with other young people in the parish. And eventually I got a letter back saying that this particular clergyman had been in touch with Peter Ball, a friend and supporter of his, who had expressed disquiet about the written agreement. So we agreed to have a meeting. Peter Ball came with the vicar and we went through what the written agreement would mean. Peter Ball said that this had to be taken away and looked again, and he recommended that his friend did not sign it. He was actively discouraging his friend from cooperating with the diocese. People found it very, very difficult to understand when a clergyman was involved in an allegation. And I remember on 2 or 3 occasions, I was really trying not to cry, because one of the things I was accused of was being like the Pharisees who crucified Jesus. It was so hostile. I was amazed at how hostile people could be in the church when it was supposed to be about loving one another. I didn't know anything about Peter Ball. I didn't know about his past. I don't know how much he was up to in terms of sexual gratification, but I do think he was up to manipulating and manoeuvring people to suit his issues of power and control and his deviousness.
When I was 9 years old, Roy Cotton came along and became the priest in charge. The whole sort of grooming process started from when I very first met him, so when I was about 9 years old. And it continued up until I was 18, 19 years old, so it's kind of a decade he dominated my life, which when you're a child is your whole life. Roy Cotton would buy me gifts, but they were very academic things. He'd buy me books about architecture and history and art, but then would only give you these gifts or talk to you about them if you went into the bedroom and it was all done on the bed. And it was just a way of accelerating what he wanted to do, really. But to the outside observer, it was educational and caring and a way of helping, you know, kids from a deprived background. Over many years, Cotton's immediate superior in the church was Bishop Peter Ball. So we're heading up to St Andrew's Church. Attached to that is a primary school. I attended the school on that site, and that's the first time I was really introduced to that church. This is the church that I used to go to, and the vicarage where an awful lot of the abuse occurred. It's like revisiting the scene of a death or something, you know. When I was a kid, I thought it was only me. And I know that sounds crazy now, but I had no concept of the fact that he could be doing this to other people. I'd been helping out because I was recruited into the vicarage or the whatever to help out with anything. It was any excuse for me to be there, really. And Cotton would come and pick me up in his car and drop me off, and then it would be really late, so I'd have to stay over. So I was helping out at this confirmation class. Peter Ball had come along to that class because they were having a rehearsal. And once all the confirmation candidates had gone home, and I was the only other person there, they cracked open a bottle of wine, sat down. Peter Ball was just sitting on a chair, and Cotton was opposite, the other side of the coffee table. And as I walked round, Peter just put his arm around my midriff like this and just pulled me onto his lap. They were talking about a problem that they'd both had. It was something to do with blood vessels in your legs, and it was a thrombosis or something like that. And Peter put his hand on my knee, and as he was talking, he was sort of talking about the thing. But as he did it, he just gradually, as sitting, full eye contact with Roy Cotton, and it was literally without breaking eye contact. He just put his hand up and just rested it on my groin, and he didn't do anything. There was no overt, but you know, I was sitting on his lap, and he was sexually aroused. And in that moment, I knew that Peter Ball was an abuser, and I knew that he knew Cotton was too. And that was terrifying. I mean, it was truly terrifying. The other thing it did is it took away any power I had to do anything about it, because Peter was this revered figure, this saintly figure. But not only that, he was Roy Cotton's boss. He was his line manager in the church. And so at this point, and the simple fact that this was so systematic, this abuse by this stage, I just thought everyone in the church knew about this. Everyone in the church was like this. And I was just trapped in the middle of it.
What has been uncovered is that there was a network of abusers operating in that area of East Sussex. This diocese was controlled by Peter Ball, of all people at the time. And he's an individual who we strongly suspect knew what was happening and knew that other priests in that diocese were abusing children. And he was taking no action to prevent this.
One New Year's, I was taken away by Roy Cotton to see another priest who was called Colin Pritchard. I was taken to a New Year's party where I was given copious amounts of alcohol. And there were lots of men, you know, who I thought were like-minded men. And I didn't know that. But I lost consciousness at some point. I remember waking up the next day back at Colin Pritchard's vicarage. I didn't have any clothes on. I was feeling incredibly unwell and thought something terrible might have happened to me. I was terrified the night before. When I went into the kitchen, I was quite violently sexually assaulted by Colin Pritchard. I mean, to the extent I was left bleeding. And I wasn't used to that. You know, I was used to systematic abuse, but I wasn't used to physical violence. I was 15 at this point. And I remember distinctly on the bus going back to school after that holidays, thinking I've really got to do something about this. You know, I've got to go to the police. But I didn't. And I didn't because I thought this is going to be like throwing a hand grenade into my family if this comes out. And it would be a massive scandal and it would destroy my life. But I could not believe that this could happen by accident. It was clear these abusers knew each other and were working together.
What's especially extraordinary looking back is the fact that I couldn't have access to Peter Ball's clergy files until 4 years into the job. I was basically given the impression that it was hands-off and it was out of limits and it was something that was being dealt with at Lambeth Palace. It was a closing of ranks. Peter Ball needed not to be having this permission to officiate. He needed not to be leading services because it gives you a legitimacy of being a person who is in authority and also to be trusted. But I was told that that couldn't be changed. So I suppose at that point I felt I had no authority because I was saying things but nobody was actually wanting to do what I was suggesting, which was to stop this man. And I felt that it was absolutely crucial to put this out into an accepted professional setup. And so I wanted a professional risk assessment.
A risk assessment of a suspected paedophile will flush out any risks that they pose to vulnerable people and children. Peter Ball obviously didn't want to have one because he knew that it would show that he was a real risk.
Suggesting the professional risk assessment unleashed the full horror of a Peter Ball campaign against me. I'd be working and the next minute somebody'd say, "There's Lord somebody on the phone for you." And I'd get a rollicking down the phone about being inhumane and cruel and what did I think I was doing. From somebody I'd never heard of, some great figure in the House of Lords. I was amazed that Peter had to bring in all these bigwigs and VIPs as proof that he was somehow okay. So in fact, it had the reverse effect on me, which was that the more he was protesting and getting important people to support him, the more I actually felt this was something that absolutely had to go ahead.
I was a Sussex police officer, a detective for 20 years. I was a DS at Brighton Child Protection Team, finished as a detective inspector. When I left the police force, I became a self-employed safeguarding consultant, and I heard somebody from the church talking about how they wanted to review all their past cases, all their historic cases. And I thought, well, I can help with this, with my background. So I wrote to Lambeth Palace. I was asked to help review all of the files at Lambeth Palace on Peter Ball. Peter Ball had been given a police caution related to an offence of gross indecency with novice monk Neil Todd. Police cautions generally are for the more minor offences, so shoplifting, minor theft, minor criminal damage. It's not often used with sexual offences. And quite quickly, I couldn't work out why he had had a police caution. It didn't make sense to me at all. It wasn't proportionate. What really struck me was finding some letters. These letters had been written to Archbishop Carey by other victims of Peter Ball in 1992, 1993, saying that they had seen that Peter Ball was being arrested and that they wanted the Archbishop to know what had happened to them.
Dear Archbishop, my own son is my source of information as Peter's scheme for youth and was approached by the Bishop on a number of occasions with unwelcome suggestions. I stripped off all my clothes and went into chapel with him to make those vows. However, Peter went further and suggested to me later that I strip off again and caress him, and he me. The Church is constantly protecting its own image and not the victims.
This wasn't just a one-off offence. It wasn't just the offence against Neil Todd. It was clear from these letters that this was a pattern of behaviour from Peter Ball, and it had gone on for many, many years. So why would it have stopped? Why would he stop offending? There was a real risk that he was still in a position to re-offend. I shared my concerns with Fiona Gardner, the safeguarding advisor in Bath and Wells, and she clearly had similar concerns.
When I read the Lambeth file, I was absolutely horrified. And I think I hadn't sort of appreciated the level of deception that I think had been going on in the church about various abusers until I read the details of the letters in the Lambeth file. Reading them and reading between the lines at the pain and the damage, and it was being tossed aside. And then I thought, you bastard, you know. How can you be so devious in that way? And I mean, I understand about distorted thinking, so I know that Peter Ball had compartmentalised his thoughts, but I was unprepared for the fact the church had done the same. It was absolutely imperative that that didn't carry on.
The whole ethos seemed to be to look after Peter Ball and to forget about the victims. I can't recall anything sympathetic or empathetic, kindly said in the files that I saw at that time about these men. And certainly with Neil Todd, it was even worse than that. It was accusing him of being malicious, of making all this up, of wanting money out of it. My feelings when I looked through that file was, this is a bishop in the Church of England, and he has somehow been allowed to abuse young men over what looked like a decade, 2 decades. I just couldn't understand how that could have been allowed to happen.
Years after the abuse I suffered as a child, I was married and I had children. And my son was coming up to like age 9, 8 or 9. And this was the age when I'd first met Cotton. And so it really began to trouble me. Then one day, my brother was working with me. And there was a piece on the radio about an abusive priest in the Catholic Church. And I noticed my brother froze. And in that moment, it had never really occurred to me, or I'd never allowed myself to think about the fact that this may have also happened with my brother. And so I just asked him, I directly asked him. I said, did anything happen with you and Roy Cotton? And he didn't say a word, he just froze. He just went white, the colour drained out of him, and he just turned to an emotional wreck in front of me. And in that moment I knew. And I felt terribly guilty. I felt completely responsible. And so I went to the police.
Phil Johnson is a true hero in this story. He's the person who has been tenacious, hammering down doors, piecing bits of evidence together, proving that bishops have been lying to him. Phil was waging a campaign for justice. He wouldn't let this drop.
You would have thought that Cotton and Pritchard would have been suspended at that time, and that could have protected others. But no, the church didn't suspend either of them. I know I've spoken directly to somebody who was abused in that period of time. You know, that could have been avoided. The church lied about the fact that they'd spoken to the police. They said they'd shared information that they didn't. I've subsequently found out Roy Cotton had, even before he was ordained as a priest, had a criminal conviction for child abuse. And the church knew about this. But the church hadn't shared this with the police. I was told directly by the police officer that the church just closed ranks and didn't cooperate at all. Years later, someone else came forward, another victim, complained about Colin Pritchard and Roy Cotton. It was an identical story to mine, but it was a mirror image. So it completely corroborated what I'd said. But unfortunately at that point, Roy Cotton died. And so I was kind of cheated. Eventually, Pritchard did go to trial and he pleaded guilty and got a 5-year sentence. But he did plead guilty to offences against me. When I originally reported to the police about Roy Cotton and Colin Pritchard, I also told them about my experiences with Peter Ball.
More and more people were putting together bits and pieces of a puzzle. There were more concerns being raised from other dioceses.
I was concerned that police had identified a potential link between Peter Ball and serious offenders, serious paedophiles, members of the clergy.
And so there was beginning to feel like a building up of information.
We reach a stage at which there are 3 individuals not happy with the situation. They are convinced that there is more activity that is yet to be uncovered. It finally seems that the storms are gathering around Peter Ball and that he is eventually going to be brought to account.
We did ask for every file held by any diocese on Peter Ball to be sent to Lambeth Palace. I thought I had seen everything. And how naive was that, because I clearly hadn't seen everything. I've been working all day looking through these files. Literally the last file that I came to, it was a report from a private investigator. I was turning the pages, sitting there on my own, thinking, I can't believe this.
These documents, they were discovered in a filing cabinet which was called the Naughty Boys Cabinet.
The Tyler report really is the smoking gun in all this. In December 1992, Eric Kemp down in Chichester hires Brian Tyler, a vicar and a private detective as well. George Carey knew about this. There is documentation written actually in Eric Kemp's hand, a note to George Carey telling him exactly what he was doing.
Finally, all my gut feelings, my instincts on this case were coming true. I literally felt like jumping out of my chair and punching the air in excitement, because I thought, right, this is it now. We can seriously start referring back to the police.
But what was interesting about the Tyler report is that the report begins with Reverend Tyler talking about what his instructions are to defend Peter, to dig up as much dirt as possible and discredit Peter's victims. But by the end of the report, Tyler himself has turned about completely and has concluded that Peter was guilty.
There was many graphic comments in the report about what men had said Peter Ball had done to him. Things like anointing their penis, masturbation, mutual masturbation. Brian Tyler is talking to him generally about what offences mean, so what gross indecency means. He explained that to him, and he evidently said, oh yes, I did have an omission. So it clearly shows a sexual act. You know, that is not lying together naked in the eye of God. Why didn't the proportionate thing happen? Anybody else would have been charged and on this information convicted. It was clear that senior clergy in Chichester and at Lambeth Palace knew the extent of this abuse. And by that I mean Eric Kemp, the Bishop of Chichester, and also the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, George Carey. I met with a DI and a DS from Sussex Police. They were very receptive. They listened to me and they shared my concerns, and they agreed to take the papers away with them, and I was thrilled. That was a major breakthrough.
The Tyler report shows that there were high-ranking figures within the Church of England who were actively seeking to defend Peter Ball in those circumstances. They were seeking to try and diminish the testimony of those people who were providing evidence against Peter Ball, and were trying to minimise the circumstances that Peter Ball found himself in. The tragedy of Operation Dunhill, right from the start, was that just talking about the issues as interest in the case started to rise, the contact was inevitably made with Neil Todd. Such was the impact of those conversations with him in 2012. Before any of us had had the chance to really get to grips with what this means for his welfare, his long-term welfare. He took that tragic decision to kill himself.
Half of me's gone. When you lose a sibling, you lose part of yourself. And we were close, very close. I got a phone call. Neil's taking an overdose. I basically got in touch with you and made arrangements to get out to Australia. You remember?
Yeah.
And then when I got there, it wasn't Neil. There was no one there. I'd sit with him all night. And any movement, any flutter of his eyelids, any twitch, it would give you hope. But it's just the body spasming. So I had to start making arrangements and start battling with the hospital to take him off life support. Peter Ball is responsible, categorically. The church, all his friends in high places. Neil thought he'd put it away, but you never get over anything like that. And when you try to speak out, and you go to the people that should be there to protect you, and they call you liars and mischief makers and make out that you're the one that's just stirring up a load of rubbish, and then you've got to go through the ordeal all over again.
When I discovered Neil Todd's story, we began to communicate with one another. And there were some real powerful similarities in our stories and in the way that we'd been treated. It's quite painful for me because the night Neil took an overdose, he called me. And I didn't pick up. And I didn't pick up deliberately because I was trying to stay boundaried. I was trying to look after myself. And then the following morning, I got a message to say what had happened. What Neil couldn't face was going through another police investigation. He had tried to be heard by the church. He'd been treated appallingly in 1993. He'd been through all that. And when he thought there was going to be another police investigation into Peterborough and it was all going to be dragged out all over again, he couldn't face it. That's what he couldn't face. Going through the whole thing, being questioned, being not believed, being not supported, it grinds you down. You know, I'm tired of this. You know, it gets hard fighting and fighting all the time.
Neil spent his whole life trying to be believed. The powerlessness you feel when you're up against such a cold institution of powerful men. When you know what has happened to you, things that have been so intimate and against your will. That's the thing that I believe crushed Neil.
The death of Neil Todd set the tone for the whole of Operation Dunhill. It was a painful lesson to my team and I that the term historical investigation may be fine factually, but what it really means is that the victims of such abuse, it's never a historical investigation for them, it's something they live with each and every single day of their lives.
A lot of different people came forward from sort of different walks of life, some people within the clergy still, some people that weren't. A lot of it was in response to media reports in relation to Peter, and some were actually people that we went to see as witnesses because we'd spoken to a survivor who said I'd told them, and when we went to see them, then they would say, well, actually something happened to me as well.
A new witness came forward. A new person came forward, independent of anything within existing church knowledge, came forward directly to my team. And it meant that we had a new person who could independently of everything that had been said so far, give us their testimony about what happened, which was fantastic from my point of view because it said, yeah, Peter Ball is worthy of investigation and needs being brought to justice. The day of the arrest of Peter Ball was probably one of the most stressful days of my life.
Excuse me, are you Peter Ball?
Yes.
I'm Detective Superintendent Carwyn Hughes with Sussex Police. Can we talk privately?
Yes. Yeah, but I was just on the way to post these, but yes, of course we can talk.
Can we accompany you to your home?
There's no need. This is my home.
It would be better if we could talk at your home address.
I don't have any secrets.
Peter Ball, I'm arresting you on multiple offences of indecent assault and attempted gross indecency. You do not have to say anything, but your defence may be harmed if you do not mention, when questioned, something you may later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Bishop Ball? Bishop!
Whether I was naive or not, I don't know, but certainly it was my perception that he reacted badly. I felt that as an old, frail man, he went very limp in the back of the car, and I felt I can't take him to custody. I don't want to be responsible for, well, ultimately for his potential demise.
Stand everyone down.
I have questioned myself so much whether I was being manipulated at that time, whether he really was ill. Whilst I'm alive to the possibility that I personally was manipulated by him at that stage, I also know the medical advice says that I did the right thing.
Carwyn did say that Peter clearly was quite unwell after he was arrested, and so was de-arrested straight away.
I'm going to take you home.
We were very aware that Peter was incredibly manipulative. You know, we knew of people that said that on the one hand, he would be saying how unwell he was and, you know, could barely walk, and in their own words, in the next minute, we almost saw him skipping up the driveway. And that actually, long term, did have an impact of what happened with Operation Dunhill. It was in his best interest to say, I can't be interviewed, because A, we wouldn't be able to ask him awkward questions, and B, he wouldn't feel under the pressure of sitting there having us ask questions that he might not be able to have answers to, of going into a room and not knowing exactly what information we had before we asked him about it. We'll never know how much he was trying to play us or whether he was.
It was immensely frustrating. It felt unfair. It felt as if once again he was getting special pleading and special treatment. And this had been going on for years. You know, at every turn, excuses had been made for him, and he got away with it. And it felt like he was getting away with it again.
There was a real concern amongst victims and witnesses that there would be some form of establishment cover-up. I was conscious that Peter Ball, he had big influence from the Church of England, and we had to be very wary about who we spoke to, when we spoke to them, where their loyalties lied.
Some of the survivors felt Peter had a big support network, and that back in 1992 Peter had effectively got away with it, in their words, and that this was going to happen again, and that, you know, the establishment would close ranks.
Around September 2014, I had a telephone conversation with Sussex Police, with a detective working on Operation Dunhill. She asked me a number of questions, and if I would be willing to be a witness in court. I told her that I was very willing to assist the police with any aspect of their investigation, but I was not happy with the process, which seemed cruel and which ignored the suffering that Bishop Peter Ball had experienced since 1993. I told her then that I thought he had had enough and had committed no offences since that caution in 1993. These things should not be brought up again.
I believe Peter Ball was obsessed by his sexual predatory behaviour. I believe that this dominated his life. The caution did not change Peter Ball's behaviour. He carried on being a manipulative sexual offender.
We know that Peter offended after his caution in 1993 because we had one person come forward who wanted to report that actually Peter had offended against him and exposed himself to him.
Although in my opinion he had failed dreadfully in his actions with young men, for most of his life as a monk, clergyman, bishop, Peter Ball had served the church with great distinction as a significant leader.
I found it harder to forgive the church. I've got more angry at the church, particularly George Carey and George Carey's role in defending Peter. I can, on one hand, I think, okay, Peter's twisted. He's a sexually, psychologically twisted individual who's manipulated young people for his own ends. The thing that I find harder to understand is why somebody like George Carey and the other bishops involved in defending him consistently, over many, many years, had not a single regard or thought for Peter's victims.
A former Church of England bishop has pleaded guilty to 2 offences of indecent assault and 1 of misconduct.
It was certainly an achievement after all this time to have Peter Ball in court, having acknowledged his guilt in front of all those people, and importantly in front of the church after they were so supportive of him for a number of years after his caution, that it was publicly acknowledged that Neil Todd was telling the truth about what had happened.
In the supposed trial of Peter Ball, effectively it was a plea deal. He was charged with an offence against me, but he didn't plead guilty to that. He pled guilty to an offence of misconduct in public office. But he wouldn't admit to committing any offences against anyone under the age of 16, because that's, you know, a child sex abuser, that's a paedophile, or commonly called a paedophile. And somehow, if they were older, it was okay. But Peter Ball certainly was abusive towards younger people, I know. I was there.
Even after he was convicted and went to prison, he was still looked after when he come out. Oh yes, it's fine. As long as he says, oh, I'm sorry, then they say, I forgive him. That's it. I don't forgive him. I haven't got my boy.
The independent inquiry said Prince Charles had been misguided in offering support to Ball.
The Church's response had been marked by secrecy and its apology remained unconvincing.
If you look at it from the outside, it is beautifully decorated. It has lovely stories. It promises so much. It promises everlasting life and redemption. But if you strip away the veneer, it is a cold machine. It's gunmetal coloured. As with any corporation, its whole reason for being is to maintain itself, to reproduce itself from generation to generation. It's not about love or compassion or kindness or sympathy or any human quality like that. The church has inserted itself so firmly into society, people don't question it.
Safeguarding has moved leaps and bounds in the church, and there's now a different cultural way of thinking.
The church is trying much harder than it used to. I think it's trying to learn from its mistakes, but it's still not getting it right. I sit on the National Safeguarding Panel for the Church of England. I've tried extremely hard, but sometimes I still think they'd rather I wasn't there. They'd rather I go away.